Welcome to Basha's Natural Wellness on Full Service Radio AM 830 WCRN. Now, here's your host, Basha.
Good afternoon, folks. I am Basha. Welcome to the Health and Wellness Show. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday. Thanksgiving was great for everybody. And today we have a special guest here in the studio that I'm going to be introducing to you. As you know, I have a passion for health. And I invited Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Am I saying it correct?
You said it right, Ayyadurai.
Ayyadurai. So we'll just call him Dr. Shiva from now on. Dr. Shiva is the inventor of email. Nothing much out there, but we'll get on that a little bit later. Holds 4 degrees from MIT, is a world-renowned systems scientist. And I have his book here in front of me. Dr. Shiva has written, it's called Your Body, Your System, Beyond Diets, How to Achieve Optimal Health for the Unique You in a Dynamic World. Dr. Shiva, welcome to the Health Show.
Thank you, Basha. Great to be here.
I'm so glad you took the time to come visit us. And I also need to say, Charlie, are you with us? I got so excited about reading Dr. Shiva's book. Charlie, are you there?
Hey, I'm here, Basha. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let me introduce you to Dr. Shiva. Say hi,
Charlie.
to Charlie.
How are you? Good to be on the show.
Great. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me
on the program.
And so, Dr. Shiva, without further ado, could you give us a little background about you and all the great stuff you've done so far?
Sure. You know, Basha, I grew up in 2 different worlds always. My whole life has been always about integrating differences and trying to bring them together. So by way of example, I grew up in India. I was born in India, but in 2 different worlds, even in India. I grew up in the cosmopolitan India of Bombay. If people have been there, it's New York on steroids, if you want to think about it. It's a city within cities within city. But I also grew up in a small village in deep South India, in Tamil Nadu, where there was no running water, no electricity, et cetera. So I grew up in these 2 worlds. And in that small village in India, my grandmother was actually a traditional healer of traditional medicine. Now, she wasn't just someone who just did that for a living. That was something she did as service. In the traditional systems of Indian medicine, you were never supposed to charge for healing. So she worked 16 hours a day in the field planting rice in a small subsistence farm. But on weekends, 30 to 40 people would line up outside her home. And she had learned from being in Burma and being in India from, yogis, how to heal people. So, for example, she knew the art of what was called Samudrika Lakshanam, which is an art of reading your face and understanding the different dysfunctions in your body. And then based on that, she would give you very different types of medicines than she would give another person. The notion of precision medicine or personalized medicine. So different types of herbs, different types of yoga postures, et cetera. Because the idea in the systems of medicine was everyone's unique. You can't just give everyone the same pill.
Right.
So as a child, I saw this amazing woman who had no degrees, tattoos all over her arms, who worked, in the fields healing people. And I was very curious how this woman could do this. That led me to America. I came here as a 7-year-old kid. My parents came here in 1970. So think about this very interesting model. This very traditional Indian family leaves India and lands in Paterson, New Jersey, in the middle of the Vietnam War, in the middle of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right?
This is the 70s,
This is the 70s.
Okay.
Literally, I left India on my 7th birthday, December 2nd, landed here 3 days later. And I grew up in New Jersey, as an American kid. Had a lawn mowing business, went through the public school systems, played soccer, baseball. But I was one of those kids, because of what I'd experienced in India, I knew the immense opportunity that I had here. I could not ignore the fact that the time in 75 when I went to India, the stark differences I saw and how much I valued what the opportunities here. So I worked my butt off.
Right.
By the time I was 14, I'd completed calculus by the 9th grade, got accepted to a special program at New York University, one of 40 kids who was accepted to learn computer science.
At 14.
At 14. And my dear mom would drop me off at the Newark Penn Station, and I would take the train into New York and study computer science with 40 other students across the United States. Graduated top of the class. But remember, this was at a time when parents weren't, today parents are afraid to send their kids down the street. I used to go to New York all by myself, 8 a.m., I'd leave at around 6 a.m., 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and come back.
Wow.
After I finished that, an interesting thing occurred. I had only had a few classes left to do in high school, humanities, and I was fortunate to get a full-time job working at Rutgers, what is now known as Rutgers Medical School, in the heart of Newark, New Jersey.
Okay.
The school system changed the rules so this young kid could work full-time, and I was given an interesting task. I thought I would be able to do medical research, which I was doing. But I was given this other task. Many of your listeners who are over the age of 40 may remember in those days, every office had a thing called the inter-office mail system, run by a secretary. A secretary on her desktop had an inbox, outbox, folders. Remember, she'd write a thing called a memo with carbon paper.
Yeah.
Well, I was asked
a pain in the butt.
It was a
wasn't
pain
it,
in the
carbon?
butt, exactly. And so if you had to do 10 cc's, you'd be typing away 5 to 6 different times.
Awful.
I was asked to convert that entire system to the electronic version. No one had done it before. I wrote 50,000 lines of code. I called it email, a term never used in the English language.
Are we talking 80 right now, like 1980?
That's 1978.
Okay.
And the interesting thing was in those days, the guys in Washington didn't know what software was. You couldn't even patent it. It was only 1980 did the Copyright Act change so I could use copyright to protect software. I went to MIT in 81, and the president of MIT said, it's too bad you can't patent software, but you should copyright it. So as a kid, I wrote away for the copyright forms, and on August 30th, 1982, I was issued the first U.S. copyright for email, recognizing me as the inventor of email. Those are the facts about email. But I did that as a teenager, long before I came to MIT. Went through MIT, did 4 degrees, in and out of there, started 7 different companies, but always had a deep love for medicine, Basha. That was my real interest.
Sure.
The email thing in many ways was a way that I learned how to program. And the interesting thing was in 2003, I came back to MIT to do my PhD, and I ended up making a major discovery how to integrate Eastern systems of medicine with modern, what we call systems theory. The net of it was I cracked a code to really understand how my grandmother was able to do this. On the other hand, I also discovered a new technology called CytoSolve, which lets us model the human cell on the computer so we can eliminate the need for animal testing. And that technology now is being used to validate, does a vitamin work or not, which herbs work, which they don't, without killing animals.
Before we even continue, I think that is so big. The name of that company again is what now?
It's Cyto. Cyto means cell solve, SOLVE. So basically...
C-I-T-O?
C-Y-T-O.
C-Y-T-O, solve.
Yeah.
We in the health field is my passion. I think there's been too much, brutality going on and too much animal testing. And people now you want chickens free range. People are starting to get involved. So the fact that one can do that to have less cruelty to animals, I think is fabulous, because that to me is another sign that we need to start having a gentler, kinder world as far as this animal testing that's been going on. So
one of the things is, I teach I have a whole institute also I call Systems Health that I teach there once a month. It's a whole series of educational programs I developed when I got back from India after my Fulbright in 2007, which integrates Eastern and Western medicine. When you really look at it, there's really 2 ways of 2 types of medicines. One is the reactive medicine for crises. So if you go back and look at the origin of Western medicine, it really comes back from Florence Nightingale, who was not just a nurse. Everyone has just reduced her to a nurse. She was actually a member of the Royal Society of Statistics. She was the first person who did big data and data visualization. She figured out during the Crimean War the reason soldiers were dying was not because of being shot, but because when they came to the hospitals, there was no healthcare system. There was no hygiene. There was no way of taking care of the soldiers. In the 1800s, you went to the hospital to die. So Florence Nightingale had a 200-year vision of a healthcare system where you would have research, you would have clean, hygienic, areas. So she developed a modern healthcare system. But we have to understand that model of health was to put the soldier back on the battlefield. So what came out of that? Great surgery, great antibiotics.
Trauma care.
Crisis care. And what happened was we started using that bazooka to start handling day-to-day health. Now, Eastern medicine is based on a very fundamental different notion. It's based on, these yogis would observe nature over hundreds of years, or they would look at a phenomenon and meditate on it, which means they were trying to understand or develop what they call preventative medicine, which is how do you maintain the health of the body. And my view is, I've been trained in Western medicine, through my PhD at MIT, but I also got trained in Eastern medicine. There's a room for both. What's occurred right now in the Western medical system is we've completely poo-pooed the preventative medicine. So people make fun of people who do yoga, yet there's 36 million people who do yoga now. People make fun of chiropractors, acupuncturists, et cetera, because these are a different modality. And my view is they both should work together.
Integrate. Yep.
And
That's
that's
right.
the opportunity that we have. Yeah.
Dr. Shiva, this is Charlie. I'd like to ask you a question about a recent study published. It was the Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Anthony Samsel at MIT. They were looking at an ingredient, glyphosate, an ingredient in Monsanto's broad-spectrum herbicide Roundup. They're claiming that it might be connected to skyrocketing cases of celiac disease, which includes about 300 symptoms in the human body. Are you familiar with that study that's been published by those two at MIT?
Yeah, let me give you the background. We've actually done 5 major papers, which are very in-depth. So in 2014, something very interesting happened. I was literally walking down MIT. I'd finished my PhD, I just started Cytosolve, and there was a front-page article on the front page of MIT which said, "Buy fresh, buy GMOs." This was on Technology Review, which is one of the most eminent science magazines. So as you start reading through that magazine, GMOs, by the way, are genetically engineered foods. The short acronym is GMOs, for genetically modified organisms. And I read this paper, or this article. It was an ad essentially saying that we should all be consuming genetically engineered foods and that all the poor people all over the world need GMOs. And this has been the nonsense that the Gates Foundation has put forward, including people like U2's Bono. You know, all these, it's a neo-missionary model. And so I got involved in using our technology, Cytosolve, to really understand this. And what we did was we went through 11,000 scientific papers that have been written about a very interesting phenomenon in plants, how plants metabolize. And, you know, there's a very important engine that the plants have called C1 metabolism. The net of it is we published a series of 5 papers where we fundamentally showed that when genetically engineered soy gets created, that genetically engineering soy has significantly lower levels of glutathione. Anyone who's listening to this that's in the health field will know glutathione is a master antioxidant.
Yeah.
And the GMO soy, which Monsanto calls Roundup Ready soy, has actually accumulates formaldehyde. The whole basis here, when you go down to when you rip away all the assertions, because what's happened with the non-GMO, pro-GMO movement is a lot of people are making assertions. So I wanted to go down into the science of it and find out the fundamental differences. Monsanto, for example, puts out genetically engineered foods, telling the world and essentially confusing the world, saying, don't worry, the genetically engineered version of our product is the same as the organic product. And it's a principle called substantial equivalence. So based on that, they put it out there. Now, here's a funny thing. No one questions them how they came to that equivalence. It's all based on self-reporting. So what we did in this research was over a series of 5 papers, which we published in journals, we showed, starting with soy, by the way, 97% of the soy in the United States is genetically engineered, that the genetically engineered version of Monsanto soy is substantially different if you looked at glutathione and formaldehyde. The problem is it's a rigged racket. These manufacturers of these genetically engineered foods, they choose whatever criteria they want, and they say, oh, it's equivalent. And then the FDA, by the way, the FDA takes no position on GMOs. They just do what's called a safety consultation. And another important thing to note is the deputy director of the FDA is Michael Taylor, appointed by Obama, the former head of science policy at Monsanto. Wow. So the bottom line is the genetically engineered version of a food is not the same. And the other bottom line is there is no safety assessment standards for GMOs, period. So many of the people, even in the health food movement, need to understand this because this is the right way to argue this point. It's not about genetically engineered foods, good or bad. The reality is there's no safety assessment standards. It's put out all through self-reporting. But glyphosate has massive issues. The latest study that just came out from Seralini shows that ultra-low levels of glyphosate, ultra-low levels cause fatty liver disease, e.g. the onset of diabetes, obesity, etc.
Now, are we talking about the soy crop, the corn crop, and wheat, or is it all foods that are grown?
Well,
what foods have been used, this product is being used on?
Well, glyphosate, just to give everyone the background, a company called Monsanto and Dow during the Vietnam War created a very powerful herbicide called Agent Orange. 50,000 tons of it were dropped on Vietnam, affected not only the Vietnamese people, but a lot of our veterans who, by the way, do not get taken care of still. Well, after the war ended, Monsanto repurposed their technology to create glyphosate, which many of you may know as Roundup, which is also an herbicide. So what they did was they monopolized the sale of glyphosate across the world to factory farms. And what ended up happening was, as glyphosate was being used as an herbicide, it was also starting to kill some of the corn and the soy, not just the weeds. So then Monsanto cleverly came up with a secondary product, which they said, buy our genetically engineered version of soy, for example. And that you can plant, and the herbicide you can use, and it won't also kill the plant. So they own both sides of the business. They own the pesticide or the herbicide, and they also owned the seed. And today what they do is they license the seed on a 1-year cycle. So it's basically a massive monopoly of the entire food pipeline. By the way, Elizabeth Warren voted to protect Monsanto, the Monsanto Protection Act. She actually screwed over Bernie Sanders on the GMO labeling bill. And by the way, Bernie also took $18,000 from the agrobiotech industry. I just finished a movie with Pierce Brosnan, who produced it, 007, and his wife, Keely Brosnan. I'm the main scientist in it. It's out there. It's won 8 film awards. But we talk about, it's called Poisoning Paradise. And it's really the entire supply chain of what's going on. We talk about how these agrobiotech companies single-handedly destroyed the half of the island of Kauai, which is what they used as a field testing environment. So the bottom line is you cannot trust Republicans or Democrats. Both of them are involved in the racket. And that's why our campaign, Shiva for Senate, is based on declare your independence. Both of these parties are corrupt. The founders of this country never wanted us to have parties. Washington was completely against it. There was never the notion of career politicians. You were supposed to have a job, you're supposed to serve, and you're supposed to go back to your job. If people go read about Washington, he was a surveyor. After he was very happy to leave being a president. He was a very prolific businessman, ran a farm, was in agriculture. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. So this notion of career politicians has got to end. We're destroying the public food supply because these guys get paid off by companies like Monsanto. They have no skills except the skill to manipulate people and the skill essentially to lobby.
So what can we do about this?
Okay, Charlie, I'm sorry to interrupt here. Ted, are you cueing us that we have to take a break, correct? All right, folks, welcome back. I am Basha, and you are listening to WCRN AM 830. We are discussing, this is a program where we do once a week, where we discuss health as our passion and what can we all do as a movement out there. And today with us, part of this movement that I wanted to start and have Let's Talk Health, we are talking with Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai.
Ayyadurai. So it's easy. So how would you say I adore you? So you just say Ayyadurai.
Ayyadurai.
Yeah.
So maybe we should have bumper stickers. I adore Dr. Shiva. Put the word adore in there, right? Put adore. I adore it. Okay. I didn't know whether it's Ayyadurai or A. Okay. Ayyadurai. Well, now you guys are getting the name across, right? Now it's so we'll just call him for short Dr. Shiva. So we are discussing, as we went to break, we're discussing health topics, what's going on in our powers to be up there. Dr. Shiva is running as an independent for U.S. Senate candidate. People get involved, the health movement, what we're doing, cruelty to our animals, what we're doing we're going to get in there a little bit. I want to talk to Dr. Shiva about GMO and labeling. And when we consumers, we all decide what we buy. We decide what we buy with our credit card. We decide what we buy with our cash. If we're not going to buy foods that are going to sustain us and are going to help us to nourish our spirit, our soul, what the hell are we all doing out there? So we need people in higher places that I feel are going to be not hypocrites, are going to have health and the government together for the same cause, which is health. I don't get involved in disease. There are great scientists out there who study it. My thing is always about health. So coming back, this book I want people to go get. It's with Dr. Shiva called Your Body, Your System. And as I introduced it, Beyond Diets, How to Achieve Optimal Health for the Unique You in a Dynamic World. We're going to go back to a little bit more about systems health. It's a passion of mine. And when we were left for break, I want people, if you need to know more about this, go to systemshealth.com. You can learn about Dr. Shiva or shivaforsenate.com. People, get involved. All right, Dr. Shiva. So as we left, we were discussing GMOs, and I know it's a big business. Do we currently, right now, if I'm a consumer and I go to a supermarket, what we're buying, do we know what we're buying? I know organic is even, you know more about this than I do, crazy, because everything's organic in all the major supermarkets. Is it really organic? How's the government helping people to that when we buy, we know that it is what it says, And if a food has been GMO, is it going to say on it GMO on the label? Where is all that at?
It's a great question. So what the history of the GMO movements is an important one. The goal was consumers broadly wanted labeling, which means they wanted to know whether this thing had any genetically engineered
Absolutely. I want to know.
ingredients on it. So Connecticut attempted to do it on its own several years ago, but Vermont was the one who said, basically, screw off to the federal government. We're going to pass our own GMO labeling bill, which they did. In fact, I was at the launch.
And somebody sued them, I heard, or something.
Yeah, so the federal government came after them, right? And then they had this thing called the DARK Act, which was they were going to move this to the federal level. And Elizabeth Warren was involved with this. And the notion was to have clear labeling, like clearly on there, this was GMO labeling. The insidious way that they did this was they put a smart code on it, the QR code,
right,
which you'd need a smartphone.
Right.
So that way Warren could say, oh, yeah, I supported GMO labeling, but they obfuscated the issue. So it made very difficult for the average consumer to know if something has GMO or not.
And we need to know.
And we need to know.
People want to know.
We need to know. So part of what this reveals, when you look at the whole GMO movement, 80% of consumers want organic food in the world.
Healthier food for their families.
And in America. So what's really interesting from a business standpoint, the software internet industry is a $400 billion industry. We think, wow, that's big.
Right.
The food industry is a $4.7 trillion industry. And this is a huge opportunity because if people want to make money listening to the show, go start an organic farm. You get 30% year-over-year growth. We don't produce enough organic food. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking about organic food that's shipped from Turkey over here. Mm-hmm. That's what Amazon is doing, something very insidious in some level. Yes, you can get stuff, but they want to make organic food industrialized organic. One of the key things that also comes out of this is that you want local produce. There's a big difference when stuff is bought fresh and it's delivered to you fresh locally. And there's many scientific reasons for it when it's picked, the nutrient value versus a banana being picked all green, right?
Absolutely.
And then shipped overseas.
And sprayed and all of that stuff.
And sprayed, et cetera. But I think the bottom line is the whole area of genetically engineered foods brings up this whole idea of a system versus a reductionist way of looking at the world. What I'm saying is that the ankle bone is connected to the foot bone, is connected to the et cetera, right? Western medicine is based on just isolating a problem to one little thing. So if you go to a doctor with a headache, they'll typically send you to 5 different specialists, right? Eastern medicine is looking at the body as a whole. When you look at genetically engineered foods, the scientists thought, oh, all I'm doing is changing this one gene, mm-hmm. which, by the way, the gene is brought in from another animal into, for example, a tomato, from a bacterium, which would never occur in nature. Don't worry about it. It's a itsy-weeny, teeny-weeny change. The reality is when you change one small thing, it can have system effects. And that's what we need to get back to when we talk about systems. We need to take a systems approach to the body.
Okay, folks, this is my passion, health. We are talking with Dr. Shiva and our distinguished speaker today on GMO health. He is running for the first U.S. senator who will take on Monsanto. You are listening to WCRN AM 830. I am Basha, and you are listening to the Basha's Wellness Show. We will be right back. Welcome back. I am Basha, and you are listening to the Health and Wellness Show on WCRN AM 830. As we went to break, our distinguished speaker today is Dr. Shiva. We are talking about my favorite topic, health. How can we change where people are more empowered to understand what they can do to have better health? We have a huge opioid crisis. We need help we're a great country, the best country in the world, but I also believe we need to put some leadership and people out there that are pretty smart, like this guy in front of me who's got four MIT, right? For inventor of the email, 4 degrees from MIT. I mean, to me, you started so early. You dedicated your life so far. You could, like I said to you a little earlier, you could just go off on the side and live happily, but you have a passion. And your passion is to integrate health so people can understand. First of all, you're fighting for non-GMO. You're going to take the dangers, which is a huge education out there, and I applaud you for that. Second, I believe that if we go back and your systems biology engineer, if you can touch a little bit, systems biology, your body, your system, natural system. We're getting that word system because I want people to understand that we as human beings need to go to our healthcare providers or whatever we're working out there with and demand more from what we're getting right now. We're getting fragmented healthcare that I believe you call it reductionist.
Reductionist, where you look at the parts. So if you look at, Basha, when in 1990, do you remember when the Genome Project started?
Right.
The
that's
whole
a great.
Western medicine basically believes that if you understand the parts, you can understand the whole. Eastern medicine says you need to understand the connections between the parts.
The interconnection.
The interconnections.
That's what you did for the email.
Exactly. So email.
Interconnected email, you're going to do interconnected systems,
interconnected
body.
the body. So it's a good analogy because email is a system.
Can I call it the human email?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, you want to look at email, which was a system. It's not the simple exchange of text messages. That's sort of a reductionist way. It's not telegraph. Email was a whole system. Similarly, if you look at the way Western medicine has progressed, it's done a great job as understanding parts, and you need to do that.
Right.
But
So
when
you have this, and you go to a specialist for this. You have this, you go to a foot doctor. And
Exactly.
we're all.
And it does good on certain things. Let's say, God forbid, some major accident occurred. Western medicine is phenomenal. But for maintaining health, Western medicine doesn't really know a lot. It's a child in the wilderness in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the Genome Project, when the Genome Project started in 1993, the idea was, could we sequence the genome? By the way, a gene is a substance in the body that relates to a particular characteristic. So, for example, there's a gene for blue eyes or gene for if you have a long nose versus a short nose. Mm-hmm. And the idea was in the mid-1990s, the idea was we knew that a worm had around 20,000 genes, 20,000 parts. So scientists
A lowly worm
had 20,000 genes.
Okay.
So therefore, people said, wow, if a worm has 20,000 genes, how many genes does a human have? They said, well, obviously, we're so much more complicated. We must have at least 500,000 genes. Well, when
a little arrogant, but
a little bit
right,
arrogant.
yeah.
When the Genome Project ends, after 10 years, it turns out we only have 20,000 genes.
So let me get this straight.
So we have the same number of parts as a worm does.
So this is a humbling experience for us humans,
It's
right?
a humbling experience. And what also emerges out of that was systems biology. Okay. So around 2003, people said, wait a minute, genes are not who we are. There's the genes create proteins which dance together, hundreds of thousands. So we are not our genes. We are what emerges from the products of genes dancing together in this big choreography. Mm-hmm. And that gave rise to a field called molecular systems biology. And that's the new field of biology saying that, you know what, your genes can be turned on and off by what you eat, what you think, the environment you're in. So you're not your genes, you're your genes plus all these other things that take place around you.
And it's epigenetics.
It's epigenetics.
Okay.
And it's epigenetics. And
it gives you more power as a human being. I think it's less than, I'm just born with these bad genes.
Exactly. And it also takes away the power of the elites who for centuries said, these people are stupid because they have these genes. These people can only be capable of this. It turns out there's not a lot of difference between two human beings. And frankly, we're maybe 1 or 2% base difference from a gorilla when you really look at it, you know, if you believe in the genetic theory. But the reality is that we have a lot of human beings have infinite potential. And that's what emerges out of that, which is a very, very inspiring model of who we actually are. So in traditional systems of Indian medicine, they also had a systems biology. The problem is they used a whole bunch of language, earth, fire, metal, water, people are into this stuff, and they never could decipher it to the Western world. So when the Western scientists started looking at Ayurveda, Indian medicine, or Chinese medicine, they thought it was snake oil. And what I did was, as part of my 2000 work, was I was able to find the bridge, convert the Eastern system of medicine to Western terms. In fact, they're related to engineering systems terms, and that's what systems health is about. So what that does, it gives us a whole new doorway to understand Eastern medicine. You find out it's actually very much related to engineering systems.
Wow.
So
and so what you're doing is you're just bridging.
You're bridging East and West, and my whole life has been about that. So the reason when I look at running for Senate, if you look at the human body, one of the things that if we want to look, religion has its place, science has its place, but one of the really important, powerful things, if you want to find truth, is engineering. Because engineering is where the rubber meets the road, right? You can talk all the science you want, all the philosophy, but if a plane doesn't take off the ground, it doesn't matter. So engineers are really, in some ways, the workhorses of what make modern world rise. So one of the things that comes out of engineering theories, when you look at nature as an engineer, nature is always decentralized. Nature doesn't centralize things. We, for example, are not one big cell. Our body has 10 trillion cells in it. And this is an important thing. So if you follow nature as an engineer, things are decentralized. There's not one behemoth entity. So when people like Elizabeth Warren, when people like Republicans and Democrats create two parties, centralized parties, this is anti-human. Humans are not meant to live in an environment or be governed by top-down. We're actually quite decentralized. Intelligence is actually at the periphery. A 14-year-old kid in Newark, New Jersey invented email. A 14-year-old kid in Franklin, Idaho invented TV. It wasn't all done at MIT. Not to say these big institutions don't do good things, but the reality is it's about decentralization. It's giving power back to the edges. And that's why we need to declare our independence. And our campaign, what comes out of that core is that you give people back their power. Real health, real
Fabulous.
jobs, clean government. So part of our issue is clean government. Everything in nature has a beginning and an end. Why are people in Congress, why aren't there term limits? You know, you had your chance, now get out,
Right.
okay?
Let some fresh air in.
Two terms, our view is 2 terms and anything you're out. The other thing is nature also is very conserved. It doesn't have infinite amount of energy. Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown together spent $200 million. Our view is $1, 1 vote. So if there's 4.3 million registered voters, you should be able to maximally spend in a federal race $4.3 million. And if you can't get your message out on that, well, maybe you shouldn't even be running because you need to pummel people like drones with broadcast advertising. When you move to real food, you know, or real health, real food is real medicine. Yoga is medicine. You know, NIH, we believe we just take 50% of the NIH funding and distribute it to research and alternative health, alt health. The other big piece is, you know, we got to say no to Monsanto because the reality is not about pro or anti-GMOs, but right now there are no safety assessment standards for GMOs. And the last piece of our thing is real jobs. In Massachusetts, we don't have enough skilled labor. For every 17 skilled job openings, only 1 person is skilled.
So how do we change that? How do
We need a movement. You know, we need a movement. It's not going to be politicians. Politicians are insignificant.
we the people.
They're basically
We the people.
salespeople for the military-industrial complex. It's we the people. And my defeating Elizabeth Warren is not about just defeating Elizabeth Warren, but it's about defeating the not-so-obvious establishment. It's easy to attack the establishment, but people like Elizabeth Warren are the fake fighters, the fake innovators, the fake Indian. You know, and I believe only a real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. And I mean this in a important way because what does Elizabeth Warren represent? Here's a woman who lied to get into Harvard. If you or I did that, we'd be fired. She took away a minority's job, yet she's claiming she supports affirmative action.
Why do we have no accountability? Why do we excuse to
Well,
death
because the
everything?
elites, well, you know what's fascinating? What's irony is Massachusetts was the center of the American Revolution.
Right.
Yet it's been taken over by the upper caste elites, starting with Harvard. One of the core slogans is we need to tax Harvard. Think about it. Mitt Romney, Charlie Baker, Elizabeth Warren, all out of Harvard, right? Mm-hmm. What do we have? Let's look at it very factually. Massachusetts, worst in corruption. Okay, lowest public integrity. 47th in worst infrastructure. Worst infrastructure. And the other piece that Massachusetts has, no one wants to talk about, is 3 times the national average in opioid addiction. Now contrast that to the nerds down the street at MIT who generated 33,000 jobs for Massachusetts. 33,000 businesses, $2 trillion in revenue. Why do we keep electing these lawyer lobbyists who add no value? They add zero value. You know, Harvard is basically a $45 billion hedge fund. It's a fake university. That's what they really are. And we need to tax Harvard. If you and I started a hedge fund, we'd have to pay 20% taxes. Harvard made $7 billion last year. That's $1.4 billion, which we should spend on skilling Massachusetts. How can Charlie Baker, how can Mitt Romney, how can Elizabeth Warren feel good when the opioid addiction rates in Massachusetts are 3 times the national average? We have the worst subways, the worst infrastructure. These people don't know how to fix anything. Mitt Romney's Bain Capital made $710 million by aggregating methadone clinics and flipping them. They don't want to solve the opioid addiction. They want to make opioid addiction an industry. There is a solution to the opioid addiction. We have a great guy that came to us, Dr. Kishore. There's a movie coming out on him called Hero in America. Kishore actually went into the homes. He came up with a multi-part program, which was in the home. You detox people in the home. You give them lifestyle changes. You give them monitoring. You give them hope in the home. The current model is you take people down to a methadone clinic. And you want to make money, go start a methadone clinic. Right. That's what Mitt Romney did. Right. And that's what the Republicans and Democrats do. They never have to solve problems because they're not engineers, they're not blue-collar workers, they don't ever have to make money doing anything. You know, I've generated jobs in Massachusetts. Everyone listening here works for a living. We need to vote every one of these politicians out. They don't serve anyone but themselves. They're unhealthy people. They're the parasites.
I love your
passion. They're viruses.
I love your passion. So if you now as an independent U.S. Senate candidate, and I love the word independent. We need
Declare your independence.
And declare your independence.
That's American.
Well, yeah. And the fact that where you're coming from and what you've already started, I think if anybody, you can certainly take it on as far as breath of fresh air, as I call it, because people, the health movement, other people are trying to work hard. They're trying to the best. They go to these experts. These experts are very busy. I'm not into the blame game. They've got 10 minutes to see you. We deserve more. I'm in the store. I see clients. I hear this all the time. I talked with them more than they have their physician talking to them but people will take their power back. I don't want to blame any doctors. People are really out there trying to do a good job, but the system has to empower the people, educate, and people got to take responsibility for their health too, because as I said on the last show, if you have stinking thinking, if you are constantly not eating better, I think there should be an incentive hopefully if you get in, that if people started a garden, we got to reward good behavior.
Well, one of the things we believe is local trade, no tax.
Okay.
So here's a model. So if you buy locally and you sell locally, no tax. So for example, local farmers, a local restaurant buys from Cisco and these big conglomerates. They should be able to buy from the local, apples in Harvard, Massachusetts, it's harder to get than from an apple in Seattle, right? Amazon. Incentivize local behavior, local buying. So now you create local economies, local trade, no tax. That's one of our models. Because what you're now saying is, look, you're actually supporting health, you're reducing a lot of different health problems, and you're creating local economies.
Absolutely, I agree with you. All right, we got to take a break, right, Ted? Okay, folks, this is my passion, health. We are talking with Dr. Shiva, and our distinguished speaker today on GMO health. He is running for the first U.S. Senator who will take on Monsanto. You are listening to WCRN AM 830. I am Basha, and you are listening to the Basha's Wellness Show. We will be right back. Hey, folks, welcome back. We are talking today about health, and when we are talking with Dr. Shiva, when we left for break, I want to ask Dr. Shiva, because we're going on the clock already. It's almost, I can't believe the hour's going by. What has happened to our healthcare system? What has happened to incentivizing us to be healthier? Can you touch on that?
Yeah, starting around, in the 70s, the healthcare system went into a massive spiraling downward because what happened was pharmaceutical companies and big hospitals were given the rights to lobby. And what ended up happening over time was things like Romney Care and Obamacare. What these are not healthcare. I don't even know why we call them healthcare. What they are is care for the big insurance companies. So they created in many ways a corrupt collusion model between big insurance, big pharma, and big hospitals. So think about it. Anyone listening, why do you get insurance, health insurance? You get it thinking, oh my God, if something horrible happens to me, I'm going to have to pay a lot of money, right? So why do you have to pay a lot of money? That means the health insurance companies, if you actually look at it, and if you go through the numbers, they are actually incented to keep hospital visits very high, procedures very high, at the same time drug prices very high. This may seem counterintuitive, but the reality is, remember, a health insurance company makes money off your premiums, off your monthly premiums. So if they get a 10% increase off their premiums, they're going to make more and more money, which means they make better stock returns for themselves and their shareholders. That's what they're about. Well, how do they get that? They want to make sure that you get scared and you stick to health insurance, which means you have to keep procedure costs high and you have to keep the costs of medicines high. So that's the thing that everyone needs to understand. This is, by the way, not discussed in any of the discussions we have. Why are the costs of pharmaceuticals high? I can do a longer discussion on that, but there are things called group purchasing organizations. It's a much larger discussion. GPOs, you can look them up. These organizations were created around the 1990s, and they essentially artificially keep the price of drugs high. For example, a generic drug, $2, they're selling at $32,000 a month. That's just an extreme example. So you have organizations which are profiting and they give kickbacks to hospital administrators. The whole thing is a disgusting racket. Mm-hmm. Now you go to hospital procedures. The reality is most of these procedures are very, very low cost procedures that they crank up a factor of 100 or 1,000% in many cases. How do we solve this? Well, the solution is actually pretty simple. If you go back to prevention, we need to, create
reward health.
Reward health. Make this part of the education process. Support local farmers. Go head on head. We've talked about GMOs, et cetera. But the other piece is it's got to go back to a direct pay model and crisis care insurance. So, for example, with your car today, you pay about $1,000, and God forbid you get into a major accident, that's covered. But if you have mechanic issues, those issues, right, you're actually out there shopping as a good person, finding a good local mechanic and making sure that they take care of it. We need to go back to that. If you think about it, in the old days, in the 70s, for example, you paid about $15, $25 for your local doctor visit. You had a relationship with your doctor. He didn't just look at you for 15 minutes. So the solution is actually pretty simple. Preventative care, you and I as individuals taking control of our health, finding local providers, and there's a huge opportunity now because you can actually get a lot of these services locally. The costs do not need to be that high. There are many doctors who are taking direct pay models, and then you have crisis care when you really, really need some, God forbid, awful incident. That's where we need to move to.
So we almost need to switch. Preventive care on one thing and crisis care on another. And right now we just have trauma care.
And then we repurpose it for preventative care. So that's why in all of these discussions, the Democrats and Republicans, who basically have 5 issues, and they basically are quite undemocratic. They basically make us discuss 5 issues, and within those bounds, we're thought that's the only solution. We need to bust open the borders of these solutions. We need to go back to very simple, basic first principles, which is prevention, prevention, prevention. And the other piece is crisis care, which is very separate than direct pay models. And those models, many people are starting to do. There's huge opportunities for that. The other piece in this, when I talk about education, think about a doctor coming out of medical school, 4 years undergraduate, then another 4 years medical school, then at minimum 2 years a specialty, or sometimes 7. They're coming with massive loans. One of the things I want to do is eliminate the need for the 4-year undergraduate. We need to create more doctors. Over the last 20 years, we've lost nearly 250,000 primary care doctors thanks to Romney Care, Obamacare.
How many did we lose?
250,000. These doctors have had to join big hospitals because they can't afford to run their local day-to-day small businesses.
Right.
We need to have many doctors. We have less doctors per capita than Cuba does. So we're talking as though we're like the number one great country on the planet, but when you really look at it, we have less per capita doctors than a country like Cuba does.
Is it about a million, I think, doctors when I
We have 970,000 doctors, 980,000 doctors.
So that almost, let's say, a million, right?
Yeah, but 70% of them, near 70%, work at a big hospital.
Wow.
So before, it wasn't like that. Now, here's the interesting thing. You walk into a hospital, get a checkup, there's a 2 out of 5 chance you're going to walk out with another infection from going to a hospital. So we got to go local.
We got to get better.
Local, local, local.
Yeah, and when I see people and I talk to them directly and always about health, I say to them the same thing. Just put it in perspective. 330 million people approximately, right? We grew from 250 million to 330. That's, we're talking 80 million people more. Now, we're at 330. I say to people, how many doctors do you think we have? 10% would be 33 million. When I tell them we're close to 1, so we are at less than 1%, they're like, I got news for you. They're super busy. You've got to get involved in your health. You've got to take some responsibility.
And the people delivering health care right now, so if you look at it like a pyramid, on the top are these big academic institutions on the top. The next level is these 970,000 doctors. Below that are the nurses, the massage therapists, the chiropractors. These people are actually delivering health. Right. And my view is we need to empower them, and we need to give them essentially the prestige that they deserve. Part of this is also giving, when you go back to the issue of jobs and skilled jobs, community colleges, VOTEC schools should be able to issue an associate's degree in the 13th year. We have a monopolization of the educational institutions. The core educational institutions around the MIT Harvard area monopolize education. They've created the educational industrial complex. So you pay a lot of money to go to them, and you end up with very few skills. Yeah. And that's why a lot of millennials are living in their basement of their parents. They don't frankly have any skills.
Absolutely. So it's stacked again. It's stacked.
It's stacked. But I think the solution is that everyone listening here should recognize that we cannot rely on politicians. These guys are career politicians. They lie, they cheat, they have no skills. Go look at the resumes of these guys. What skills do they have? Can they actually fix anything? Can they actually read a balance sheet? On my Twitter, I said, here's a balance sheet and an income statement. Can a politician, do they know whether a loan is an asset or a liability? They probably have no idea. So these guys are actually, frankly, unfortunately, they don't have a lot of skills. And that's why, look at Massachusetts. They've created a state where for every 17 skilled jobs, only 1 person is skilled. That's what the swamp brings to us. And we got to end it. If we want to really change it, we got to get people like myself, people like you, everyday people work for a living, participating in government, and then going back to work. That's the model. And I think my running against Warren gives us that opportunity. And my goal is, it's not about passing this bill or that, but it's to start a wave in this country where we start saying, look, let's go back to everyday people, because everyday people actually have a lot more brains than these politicians who are basically salespeople, as I keep saying, for the military-industrial academic complex. They serve no one but themselves, all of them.
Well, this is, folks, you're hearing it. We need to have a paradigm shift. We need to get people involved. We need people who are smart leaders out there that can actually and be transparent and give the power back to the people. And the people got to vote in people, hold them accountable, and say things such as, can we fix what we've got and be better? We all want better.
And the cool thing is about people listening to a food and nutrition show, what's great about food and nutrition, it's one of those things that you control. You vote with your fork.
You have to have food. You got to eat every day.
Real food is real medicine.
And without health, what really gets me when I got involved in the movement, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. If you don't have healthy people and a healthy society, they cannot work. If they cannot work, they do not produce. They can't pay taxes. So certain elite are making buku money. But what about the rest of the people? Health is like breathing air. It's your fundamental birthright to get up, have choices, truth given you, but then you decide what's best for your life. And when we are stacked, I just feel like people get involved. It's your health. Read labels. Start demanding. I hope once you do get into the Senate, Dr. Shiva, that you become more transparent as far as this whole GMO thing. I want to go to supermarket. I want to read the label. I want to know what I'm buying. I want rewards for local stuff. And that's where...
Bottom line is we got to declare our independence. That's what Shiva for Senate's about. Declare your independence.
All right. Go to shivaforsenate.com. We had a wonderful time talking with you. We hope you can come back some other time. And I am Basha. You are listening to WCRN AM 830. Till next week, Monday, from 1 to 2, where it is all about your health.